Hello, Com231. This is your video for week 2. Week 2 goes over chapters 3 through chapter 7. And this is where we're going to talk about the different areas of anxiety, of listening, of ethical speaking, of analyzing our audience, and then finally getting down to the idea of selecting your topic and writing your thesis statement. Before I get into some of the details on these chapters, I want to talk to you about your first speech, which is an introductory speech. All the instructions are on Blackboard, so be sure you're checking there. But the introductory speech is a 2 to 3 minute speech where you're going to introduce someone to the class. You're going to tell us something about someone. We need to know a reason why they're being introduced, and then you're going to introduce them to us. Think awards ceremony, retirement, lifetime achievement awards, graduations, any of these kinds of reasons can be reasons to introduce somebody. And for this speech, presentation aids are not required. You don't need to be using presentation aids at all at this point because obviously we have not discussed presentation aids yet. But you want to be sure you're starting to work on this speech now. All of the information can be seen in the week 3 assignment, and you'll be ready to go once you look at all of that. So starting this week off, we're starting with chapter 3, and chapter 3 is all about managing our speech anxiety. We all have some speech anxiety. Public speaking is the thing that Americans are most afraid of. We're more afraid of public speaking than we are of death, of spiders, being eaten by a shark, struck by lightning, coronavirus. We are more afraid of public speaking. So it's really important that we acknowledge the anxiety and that we learn how to manage it. There are 4 stages of speech anxiety. There's pre-preparation, so that's the anxiety that you feel right now before you even start working on a speech. Then there's preparation. That's anxiety you feel when you sit down and actually get ready to work on a speech. There's pre-performance, and that's the anxiety you feel in the hours or moments leading up to the speech. It's written, it's ready to go, but you're nervous right before you have to do it. And then there's performance anxiety, and that's the anxiety that happens when you step up and get ready to actually do your speech. Some of us may experience more than one of these, but you likely have one of these that is more extreme than the others. That's really the place that you focus. And chapter 3 gives you all kinds of ways to manage these things, to deal with what these are, to handle it. But the big thing to know is that you want to start working early, you want to work regularly, and you want to practice a lot. So by starting early, you give yourself plenty of time. By working regularly, you keep things fresh, you don't put things off, you're not cramming things at the end. And practicing, the textbook suggests 6 times as a minimum. I will tell you that you need to practice more than 6 times. You absolutely need to practice more than 6 times. You're going to have to go through a lot more times than that. You can do things like videotaping yourself to really help you, especially since this is an online class where we're going to be performing our speeches either via video upload or via live video. So that can be very beneficial to you, but you want to be sure that you are actually practicing regularly and that you're starting early. Chapter 4 is all about listening and really gets into some of the aspects of listening and the details of it. So the big thing to get from chapter 4 is that a person is always communicating. Even if you're not speaking, you're communicating. You cannot turn off communication. Silence communicates. The thing that you want to really start to look at is the difference between hearing and listening. So hearing is our physical body response to sound. If you are not deaf or don't have any kind of hearing impediment, then you can hear, but are you listening? Listening is where we actually process the information. It's where we apply meaning. It's where we connect with the other person who's communicating. That's what happens in listening. Listening involves much more than just your ears. It involves using your brain. It involves your emotions. So we want to make sure we understand the difference there. You want to be sure that you're defining your listening goals. Why are you listening? What's the purpose here? And then you want to start active listening. And this is focused, purposeful listening where you communicate that you are listening to the speaker, where you may ask questions, where you may nod your head or give little yeah kinds of experiences, where you're making eye contact with the speaker. All of those are an important part of active listening. And active listening is where we actually start to retain information, start to understand information. Another thing we want to pay attention to with listening is our perception. So your perception shapes your reality. If you perceive somebody as being untrustworthy, you're never going to trust what they have to say. Does that mean they're untrustworthy? Not necessarily, but possibly you perceive them that way. So your perception shapes your reality. And this is something that we call your worldview. This is how you interpret the world. This is the lens through which you interpret the world. And that can have an impact on listening. For example, if you think that all police officers are bad, you're not going to listen to them. If you think that all kids have nothing important to say, you're not going to listen to a kid. That worldview is going to impact what you have to say. An example of this, I had a student who told me one time that he couldn't learn anything from me because I was a woman. That's a worldview. He didn't learn anything from me. He also did not pass my class. That worldview is going to shape how you see the world, how you interact with the world, the lens with which you focus on the world. So you want to be sure that you are understanding that as part of your listening and how that impacts your listening. Chapter 5 gets into ethical public speaking, and this is ethos, the credibility of the speaker. Is the speaker credible? Are you credible as a speaker? So some things to help you keep on an ethical speaking path are to avoid hate speech, stereotyping, generalizations, inflammatory language, slander. We don't want to engage in any of that. There's no place for that in a public forum. There's no place for that in public speaking, and it's not necessary to make your point or convince people of something. So you just want to avoid those things altogether. You want to demonstrate trustworthiness and respect for your audience. You got to show people you're trustworthy. You got to show your audience you respect them. The number one way for you to connect with your audience is eye contact. So in a situation like this where we're doing things on the computer, eye contact means looking at the camera. In times when you see me doing a video, you'll see me make eye contact with the camera. You'll see me looking straight into the camera. And that is super important when we're doing videos. If you're doing a video and you're looking down like I am now and you're not looking up, it makes people not want to pay attention to you. You want to be sure you're actually looking up and giving eye contact, whether it's in person or it's over a video. This can also be difficult because we have a tendency to want to look at ourselves as we're speaking when we're using video instead of at the camera. So you may want to minimize the window of yourself. You want to maybe put something like your notes up to help detract from the likelihood that you're going to be looking at yourself instead of looking at the camera. So that's a really important thing to do. The other thing that Chapter 5 talks about is plagiarism and copyright violations. And these become really important, particularly as we get into your last two speeches, which require academic outlines and presentation aids. Plagiarism is taking anybody else's work and claiming it as your own, or simply not giving them appropriate credit. So this is where citations become important in your speeches. Copyright violations are kind of like plagiarism in that it is still claiming somebody's artistic work as your own without giving them credit. So this may mean using a photo, a logo, some kind of a design like that somebody else created and using it in your presentation aid and not giving them credit. I am a stickler for this for a couple of reasons. One, I'm an academic journal published author who's done a lot of research, and plagiarism is just one of those things that we can't tolerate. The college has a policy on that. You can read about it in the student handbook, but plagiarism of any sort can cause you to not only fail a course, but be potentially disciplined by the college. So you want to avoid plagiarism. Copyright violations, I'm a stickler because when I'm not teaching, I'm a graphics designer, and I've had people steal my work and try to claim it as their own or try to use my work for a different business than what I did the work for and who paid for it. So copyright violations mean if you don't cite who took the picture or who created the artwork, that's a copyright violation. You've got to tell us who did the artwork, who made the image, who took the picture. Even if it's a picture your mom took. I had somebody do a speech about running. They posted a picture in their part of their presentation of them actually running a race, and mom had taken the picture. They had to put at the bottom of it photo credit and then mom's name to be able to be appropriately giving credit for these things. So you want to be thinking about those kinds of issues and make sure you're not falling into plagiarism issues, copyright violations. Those are things that you'll have to pay attention to as we get into those last two speeches, but they're definitely a part of ethical public speaking. When we find out somebody lied about these things, we lose all trust in them, and you don't want to be that person. Chapter 6 starts the concept of analyzing the audience. And the goal of audience analysis is to gather information to help you shape your speech. So you're just looking to make your speech meaningful to the audience. We're not pandering to the audience. We're not just telling this audience what they want to hear and another audience what they want to hear, but we do want to make sure our speech is meaningful to an audience. For example, you guys are already in college. Telling you how to apply to college, how to apply to Coastal would not be meaningful to you. That's not a meaningful speech. You're already here. You want to make sure that your speech becomes meaningful to your audience. So we use some tools to help us with that. We use demographics. These are observable statistical characteristics, your age, gender, height, any of those kinds of observable demographic characteristics. And then we have psychographics, and these are much harder to figure out, and we can't always observe these. These are your attitudes, beliefs, and values. These are not things that are always on display. We can sometimes pick up some of them. For example, if someone is wearing a cross necklace, we may associate that with a specific religion, but we can't always look at somebody and say, oh, this is how they think about this topic or that topic. And it can get really dangerous when we try to look at people's demographics and decide what we think their psychographics are. So we have to be very careful with those. Chapter 6 also goes over the different types of audiences, things like a captive audience where you have to be there, a hostile audience, all of these types. And then it talks about the target audience. Your whole audience is likely not your target audience. Your target audience are the people who you actually think are going to benefit from and possibly do something about the information you're giving them, depending upon if this is a informative speech, a special occasion speech, or a persuasive speech. So you want to be sure that you're kind of paying attention to who your real target is. Who do you actually think this is going to impact? And then you want to use the slides in chapter 6 here to do the audience analysis activity that you'll see in week 2's assignments. So you want to be sure that you're paying attention to those slides in chapter 6 for that. Chapter 7 is all about the actual process of selecting your topics, getting your purpose, getting a thesis statement, all of that kind of thing. So the first thing you want to do is know the limits or parameters, which for you guys is the instructions. You want to be sure you're paying attention to what the assignment actually is. Brainstorm a list to get a good ideas of topics, subtopics. Be sure you're doing all of that. You want to look at the general purpose versus the specific purpose. So your general purpose might be to inform, to persuade, or for a special occasion. And informatives give information. They answer the question how or what. Persuasives are you're trying to convince the audience of something, answers the question why. And special occasions are celebrating, commemorating, inspiring. And those are what your first 2 speeches are special occasion speeches, and then you have an informative and a persuasive. So we'll get to all of those topics. So those are your general purposes. And then we have a specific purpose. So exactly what do you want your audience to get out of it? So great, it's to introduce you to, it's a special occasion speech to introduce you to someone. Well, who am I introducing you to and why am I introducing you? That becomes your specific purpose. And then from there you get a thesis statement. And the thesis statement and possibly number sentence is a really important skill for this class and for any academic class you're taking in college. Most people misunderstand what a thesis statement is. A thesis statement is not an introduction. A thesis statement is not an abstract. A thesis statement is not a question. A thesis statement is not a paragraph. A thesis statement is a statement, one sentence that ends with a period. This is telling your audience, here's what I'm going to talk about. It will preview your topic and your 2 to 3 main points. You may decide to do that in 2 sentences if you use what's called a number sentence. So I'm going to give you an example of this. For example, if my general purpose is to inform and my specific purpose is to tell you about birds in North Carolina, a thesis statement may go something like this. There are many birds native to North Carolina that even novice bird watchers can spot. That's a thesis statement. I'm telling you that there are lots of birds that novice bird watchers can spot. There are lots of birds that beginning bird watchers can see. That's my thesis statement. My number sentence then will preview my 2 to 3 main points. And a number sentence would go something like this. 2 of these birds are the osprey and the cardinal. Now you know exactly what my 2 points are going to be. I'm going to talk to you about how to spot an osprey if you're a beginning bird watcher and how to spot a cardinal if you're a beginning bird watcher. I don't even know if those are actually 2 birds that are native to North Carolina. I'm totally making this up off my head, so just roll with me. You could put those into one sentence. You could say the osprey and the cardinal are 2 birds native to North Carolina that are easy for the novice bird watcher to find. There you go. One sentence, same information. You can do your thesis statements in one sentence or in a thesis statement and a number sentence, but that is it. It should be no more than those 2 sentences and only 2 sentences if you use a number sentence. Nothing else is a thesis statement. If some other professor has told you a thesis statement is your introduction, it's really not. If they've told you that it's a paragraph, it's really not. Now, having said that, obviously for any given class, you do what your instructor says. So if somebody says they want a whole paragraph, you write a whole paragraph. But just understand that it's not a true thesis statement. The thesis statement is simply that last sentence or those last two sentences of your introductory paragraph or section, whether it's a paper or a speech. So you want to be sure you understand how to do that, and there'll be some videos and activities to really help you get secure on thesis statements as we go throughout the course. I hope you guys have a great week too. And if you have questions or anything that I need to address, be sure you're emailing me or that you're texting me on the Remind app, because those are the only ways to really get a hold of me, and I will respond very quickly to you. And if we have to, we can set up a time to meet face-to-face on a Collaborate and things like that. So I hope you guys are doing well. Let me know if you have questions, and I will see you again for week 3.